December 1945. The war in Europe has ended. Germany has surrendered. Allied forces now control occupied territory across the continent. Military headquarters that once directed combat operations are transitioning to administrative and occupation duties. General George S. Patton is no longer commanding troops in battle. His Third Army, which advanced rapidly across France and Germany in 1944 and 1945, has been dissolved as a combat force. Patton has been reassigned to command the U.S. 15th Army, a unit responsible primarily for writing historical reports about the war. During this period, Patton continues to speak publicly. He gives interviews. He speaks to officers under his command. He comments on occupation policy, denazification, and the emerging relationship between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. These statements are made after victory, not during combat. They are recorded by journalists and reported up the Allied command structure. Some are viewed as controversial. Others are seen as politically damaging at a time when the United States is shaping its post-war image. Patton's battlefield achievements are no longer the focus. Attention shifts instead to his views, his language, and the potential consequences of allowing a senior general to speak without restraint. This shift marks the beginning of a different kind of conflict. By late 1945, George S. Patton is one of the most recognized American generals of the Second World War. His reputation is built on speed, discipline, and aggressive maneuver warfare. He commanded U.S. forces in North Africa in 1942, led 7th Army during the Sicily Campaign in 1943, and later took command of 3rd Army in Northwest Europe. Under Patton, 3rd Army became known for rapid advances following the Normandy landings. From August 1944 through the spring of 1945, his forces moved across France, relieved Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, crossed the Rhine, and advanced deep into Germany. These operations were documented in official reports and widely covered by Allied media. Despite his military success, Patton was never an easy figure within the Allied command structure. His leadership style was strict and outspoken. He believed in harsh discipline and direct language. Earlier controversies, including incidents during the Sicily Campaign, had already placed him under scrutiny from senior commanders and political leadership. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the priorities of the United States Army were changing. Combat leadership was giving way to occupation management, diplomacy, and public messaging. Generals were expected to support policy, not debate it publicly. Patton, however, continued to express personal views on strategy, governance, and the future balance of power in Europe. These views were increasingly out of step with official policy and were no longer protected by the urgency of combat operations. The environment around him was shifting, and the tolerance that had existed during wartime success was beginning to narrow. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Allied military authority in Europe shifted toward stabilization and political control. The United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union divided Germany into occupation zones. New priorities included denazification, civilian administration, and coordination with Allied governments. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, as Supreme Allied Commander, emphasized unity, discipline, and restraint among senior officers. Public statements by commanders were expected to align with official policy. The U.S. Army was increasingly aware that public perception would shape post-war relations, particularly with the Soviet Union. During this period, Patton served as military governor of Bavaria under 3rd Army occupation duties. He expressed frustration with denazification procedures, arguing that many experienced administrators were being removed regardless of individual responsibility. Some of these comments were made publicly, including remarks reported by journalists in September 1945. Patton also spoke openly about his views on the Soviet Union, suggesting that conflict with former allies was likely. At a time when U.S. leadership was attempting to manage a careful diplomatic transition, such statements were viewed as disruptive. In response, Eisenhower relieved Patton of his role as military governor and reassigned him in October 1945 to command the 15th Army. This unit had no combat role and was tasked with compiling historical records of the European campaign. The reassignment was officially described as routine. Internally, it was understood as a reduction in influence. Patton retained his rank but lost operational authority and public visibility. With the background set, attention now turns to the different forces, personal, political, and institutional, that shaped how Patton's words were received after victory. The turning point comes in the late summer and early autumn of 1945. In September, several of General Patton's statements are published by American journalists covering the occupation of Germany. These comments focus on denazification policy and the administration of occupied territory. Patton argues that removing large numbers of former Nazi Party members from civilian administration is impractical, stating that many had joined the party for professional survival rather than ideological commitment. These remarks draw immediate attention in Washington and at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. At the time, denazification is a central political objective of U.S. policy in Germany. Any public criticism from a senior general is viewed as undermining Allied authority and messaging. Patton also continues to speak privately and publicly about the Soviet Union. He suggests that the Red Army represents a future threat to Europe and expresses concern that the Western Allies are conceding too much influence in Eastern Europe. While such views are not uncommon within military circles, expressing them openly in 1945 conflicts with official diplomatic positions. General Eisenhower responds by meeting with Patton and issuing formal instructions limiting public commentary. The concern is not Patton's past performance in combat, but the effect of his statements on civilian morale, Allied unity, and international relations. On September 28, 1945, Eisenhower removes Patton from his position as military governor of Bavaria. The decision is not announced as punishment. Instead, it is framed as a reassignment. Behind the scenes, however, the message is clear. Patton's value as a battlefield commander no longer outweighs the political risks associated with his public speech. This decision marks the end of Patton's operational role in Europe and sets the stage for a final reduction in his influence. In October 1945, General Patton is formally reassigned to command the U.S. 15th Army. The unit has no combat mission. Its primary task is to document the history of American operations in Europe during the war. Patton retains his rank, uniform, and official standing, but his authority is now administrative rather than operational. The reassignment effectively removes him from public influence. He no longer directs troops in the field or shapes policy in occupied territory. Press access is limited. His role becomes internal and largely symbolic. Within the U.S. Army, the decision is understood as final. There is no plan to return Patton to a major command. The war is over, and senior leadership is focused on demobilization, occupation stability, and long-term political alignment. Commanders who are outspoken or unpredictable are seen as liabilities. Patton is aware of the shift. His personal diaries from this period indicate frustration and disappointment, though he continues to carry out assigned duties. He begins reviewing battle reports, operational maps, and after-action summaries for inclusion in official histories. On December 9, 1945, Patton is seriously injured in an automobile accident near Mannheim, Germany, when his staff car collides with a U.S. Army truck. He dies 12 days later, on December 21, 1945. His death ends any possibility of return to active command. Official statements describe the loss of a distinguished officer. There is no public discussion of controversy or reassignment. The turning point is complete. Patton's career concludes not with demotion or court-martial, but with quiet removal from decision-making authority. What follows is not about combat outcomes, but about how institutions manage victory, memory, and individuals who no longer fit the direction of policy. After Patton's reassignment and subsequent death in December 1945, the consequences of his career trajectory become clear. The U.S. Army and Allied leadership continue occupation duties across Germany without his direct involvement. Patton's operational influence ends, his public visibility is reduced, and his ability to shape policy is effectively removed. Reports and correspondence from the period show that Eisenhower and the War Department viewed Patton as a highly capable general, but politically sensitive. His forthright comments about denazification and the Soviet Union had challenged diplomatic and administrative priorities. By placing him in command of the 15th Army, the Army preserved his rank and reputation while limiting any further public statements that could interfere with post-war objectives. Public reactions to Patton's reassignment are minimal. Many soldiers under his command recall his leadership during combat positively, citing speed, organization, and tactical effectiveness. Journalists note his reassignment without significant commentary, as attention increasingly shifts to reconstruction, demobilization, and the emerging tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. Patton's death shortly afterward ends any debate over his career's continuation. Internal Army assessments recognize his contributions to the rapid Allied advance across Europe and his role in relieving the siege of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. Official histories, compiled in part by the 15th Army under his supervision, document Third Army operations in detail, cementing Patton's strategic legacy. His removal from command and limited public exposure illustrate the post-war challenges faced by military leaders. Victory on the battlefield did not guarantee influence in peacetime administration or policy. Officers who had excelled in combat were now subject to institutional controls that prioritized political and diplomatic considerations over operational experience. Patton's case demonstrates the balance between military achievement and the expectations of public conduct. Even a celebrated general could be sidelined if statements or opinions conflicted with overarching policy goals. The management of his career after victory reflects a broader pattern in military history, where the transition from war to peace reshapes leadership roles and determines which voices are allowed in the public sphere. Patton's operational successes remain documented and studied, but his post-war experience serves as a clear example of how the military and political systems manage authority, messaging, and the potential consequences of outspoken senior officers. The context of his removal and limited visibility sets the stage for evaluating the historical significance of his career and its impact on post-war military leadership. George S. Patton's career highlights the complex relationship between military achievement and political oversight. On the battlefield, his leadership was decisive. His rapid advances across France and Germany, his coordination of armored units, and his ability to inspire troops made him one of the most effective Allied generals of World War II. Yet the end of combat operations brought a new set of expectations. Post-war authority required alignment with broader political objectives, public messaging, and diplomatic strategy. Patton's directness, which had been an asset in wartime, became a liability in a context where words could influence both occupation policy and international relations. His reassignment to the 15th Army and the limitation of his public role reflect a calculated decision by military leadership. It was not a judgment on competence, but a measure of control over influence. Even a general of Patton's stature could be sidelined when his statements conflicted with the priorities of the U.S. government and Allied command. Patton's death in December 1945 closed his personal chapter, but his military legacy endured. Studies of Third Army operations, including the relief of Bastogne and rapid armored advances, remain central to understanding American armored warfare. At the same time, his post-war experience offers insight into the challenges of transitioning from combat leadership to peacetime governance. The story of Patton after victory is a reminder that history evaluates both action and context. Success on the battlefield does not guarantee continued authority, and the interface between military power and political policy can redefine a leader's role. Patton's life demonstrates the balance between effectiveness, accountability, and the responsibilities imposed by a changing world. Victory was not only measured in miles gained or enemy defeated. It was also measured in how leaders navigated the limits of their influence once the guns fell silent.